Are they ready? You ready? Okay. Hello, if I could have your attention, please. Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our webcast viewers. My name is Gillian Riley, President of the Canadian Club of Toronto and your host. Viewers, thank you for joining us. Nos téléspectateurs, merci de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. On vous présente une table ronde qui va adresser un sujet important, gouvernance entreprise. As you know, we live in one of the most diverse cities in the world. Our club strives to represent this diversity at all times, not only through the topics that are discussed, but also through the speakers who present them. We offer a forum for business, political, and cultural leaders to share their ideas with us. Today's panel is no exception. I would like to acknowledge the generous support of today's sponsor, Borden Ladner Gervais, represented by Sean Weir. Thank you. I would also like to recognize the youth and young leaders who have joined us today, thanks to Blair Franklin Capital Investment. And the attendees today are from the Rotman School of Management. Maybe you could just stand up. Now let me introduce our panel. Corporate governance, whether here locally or around the world, is under increasing scrutiny. Issues that directors face include transparency in decision-making, sustainability, information security, and diversity. We look forward to hearing from our panel, and joining us are Dr. Heather Munroe-Blum. Dr. Blum serves as chairperson for the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board and is principal president emerita of McGill University. She holds a number of corporate directorships, including director of the Royal Bank of Canada, where she chairs its corporate governance committee. Some of her other corporate roles include director and vice chair of the Gardner Foundation. Tom O'Neill. Tom is chairman of the board of Scotiabank and the retired chair of the board of PwC Consulting. Mr. O'Neill held senior executive positions with PwC Consulting and PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP, and formerly served as chair of the board and chief executive officer of PwC. Tom also holds other directorships. Jochen Tilk. Mr. Tilk has been president and chief executive officer of Potash Corp since 2014. His corporate roles include serving as the director of Campotex Limited, the Fertilizer Institute, and the International Fertilizer Association. Mr. Tilk is also member of the Business Council of Canada and the C.D. Howe Institute. Moderating today's panel is Rahul Bhardwaj. Mr. Bhardwaj is president and CEO of the Institute of Corporate Directors. The accomplished executive and director was most recently the president and CEO of Toronto Foundation. Rahul, it is my great pleasure to turn the Canadian Club of Toronto's podium over to you and our panelists.
Thank you very much, Gillian. And welcome, everybody. We're very fortunate today to have with us three very seasoned directors, and I think that's the right term they use these days. And seasoned, they're going to be bringing some wonderful perspectives on the future of corporate governance. And when I start to think about the future of corporate governance, I'm reminded that this is sort of code for making sure that all the directors in the room, that we don't end up being analog players in a digital world. Because things are changing really fast. And we could spend the whole afternoon here talking about what the future of corporate governance is. But what I really want to do is to tap into some very real experience that these seasoned directors have had. I'm going to start with Heather today. And Heather, I'm going to ask you a little bit about top-of-mind issues, because what we really want to start to get a handle on is what's front of center of your mind, and really what's changed over the past decade or so.
Thank you very much, and let me thank you, Jillian, and through you, the Canadian Club, for the opportunity to be here today. It's a terrific theme, and when you say top of mind, there's lots to think about. If I go back in my mind to when I first joined corporate boards in the early 90s, it's a total change, I would say, from the considerations. You know, moving, just one example would be moving from audit to risk. And thinking about the very multidimensional way that boards have to deal with risk today. Talent, of course, is a top consideration, attracting and retaining the best talent, both to management and to boards. But I would say, and it maybe fits with my background, one of the real special considerations for today, I think, is board culture. And that goes really from considerations of who's on the board and diversity, something that I'm sure we'll talk about on this panel, through to the relationship between the board and management, understanding the difference between managing and governing, and then some of the initiatives, and I think very effective ones, to really create a culture in a board that allows for deep engagement on the issues that really should be grappled with by boards, and that we must grapple with in an open and direct way in order to do our duty.
Tom, you seeing board culture as a big issue you've been working through?
I think board culture is critical because, and particularly the tone from the top, which is board culture and CEO and team culture. And when culture's right, good things happen, and when it isn't, you can see the train wrecks. So that is a fact. The other thing I would add to Heather's point was that I go back, I started in 2003 in boards, and then it was SOX was all consuming for publicly listed companies. And nowadays it's kind of a yawner, it's built into the system. Then we went into the say on pay and the remuneration of CEOs. Now we have the MD&A in a proxy is almost as long as the annual statements. It's getting crazy. But I'd say today what we're looking at, I think, as emerging issues is cybersecurity for one, absolutely, for all companies, not just financial institutions. And for financial institutions, the pain of breaking laws in the AML and ATF, anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing is huge. So we have to be extremely careful in that milieu. And I think that affects all financial institutions in the world, not just here in Canada. But on culture, if you go back to that, that really is the mainstay, I think, if you've got the right culture.
For sure.
Yeah.
So let's dive just a little bit further on the cyber for a second.
Yeah.
Can we give a little bit of context now? When we were looking at cyber risk and you're evaluating cybersecurity, how much time are you spending on it? What's different now than, let's say, would have been 10 years ago?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, 10 years ago, I don't think cyber existed. I could be wrong, but if it did exist, we certainly weren't aware of it at the board level. But at the bank, I can tell you that it's serious business. And 2 years ago, Brian took the board and the senior management team down to Silicon Valley so we would get a better appreciation for what some of the issues were. And we made tours of various institutions, including fintech disruptors at Andreessen Horowitz. And two things of my observation. One is I felt better coming back than I went going down, because I think we were doing things the proper way and properly staffed. So I felt a lot more confident about the issue. But the fact is that there's very few people who understand it. And it's really hard, I think, to get board members who are steeped in the issue itself. We were lucky to get one, but I think any company, whether you're in financial institutions or otherwise, cybersecurity is something else. I think the Bank of Bangladesh theft last February, I think it was, 90 million US disappeared through the SWIFT system and was vaporized in seconds. And happily, the clerical error was made and the second one was caught and shut it down. But that 90 million is missing.
It's crazy.
You can guess where it went, but you don't know.
Right. Jochen, I know that cyber's front and center of your mind as well.
Yep, very much so. And maybe say a very quick introductory comment. So I come from the commodity business, and which is very cyclical. And we also, I think, traditionally thought, well, there's other targets where people may go to first, because what can anyone profit or benefit from when you go to a commodity company. As companies get bigger, and I come from a company that is in the process of getting bigger through a merger, all of a sudden becomes a reality. We're also putting two boards together to become one board, and front and center is what our top priorities in cybersecurity comes up. I'd like to connect 2 points that were made, which I think are really interesting. One is culture, the other one are the subjects. And I found, my experience, first time I saw that was safety, when people said, well, safety is not just a program. It's a culture that you need to create, and how do you do that in the board, management, in the companies? And I find more recently that cybersecurity is very similar. It's not much about, not only about programs that we're intended to follow, but it's about a culture that we're trying to create. And I think I see that as a bit of a shift, a good one.
So let's just, on that cyber point though, I think, can we give the group here a little bit of order of magnitude of not only how big it is for you at the board, but how big a risk is it? How much are you getting pinged through cyber?
Yeah.
Is this massively growing? Could you give an order of magnitude to this at all?
In terms of the impact on, the financial impact?
Exactly, or the hacks that you're getting.
Yeah, I think they're very different. I'll give you some examples that we deal every day. The most common is this perpetual phishing, which goes what you find in your email accounts and your phone, and that's just perpetuating. There are thousands, 10,000s a day, and my colleagues here would have the same. And of course, if any of them go through and people find their way into the systems, then the damage can be very, very significant. But my board, and I certainly as CEO, the biggest concern that I would have is not just the monetary impact, but it's the loss of data. It's the breach of privacy. It's the credibility we have among our employees. I mean, I see one of the utmost responsibility that we have is to protect our employees, protect our stakeholders, and protect our customers. And if that data leaks out, you can't even measure the numbers. It's in the billions. So I think that's the greater risk than trying to capture one particular incident. And that is the number one concern that we have, is that we breach that trust that we have, which is really, I'd say, one of the most important credentials that make us a successful company.
Yeah, maybe if I could speak to this issue, I think it's worth thinking, first of all, about technology risks across the board. Cybersecurity is one piece of that, but in fact, having systems that are effective is really important. And you asked, Rahul, how much do we engage at the board level? And I would say both at CPPIB and RBC, very much. Just to go back to the financial institutions example, RBC was out in front on technology developments in client services, and we have a CEO who came out of retail, having led some of that. We engage, I would say, virtually at every board meeting on some element of technology risks, and any company that doesn't see an exponential increase in the approaches to breaching security from a cybersecurity point of view isn't equipped to actually assess what's happening there. So having regular reports on the diversity and quantum of attacks, and then your capacity to respond effectively to them is really important. So there's almost a new audit function from a board perspective to be engaged on that.
I'm struck by what Tom said earlier. If 10 years ago it didn't exist and now these are perpetual attacks, that just goes to speak to how much change is taking place in terms of what the board has to engage with and focus on. But it also touches a little bit on board culture and composition, which you were touching on earlier, about how do you make sure as a board member you stay current on these issues. And as leaders on your board, what are you thinking about in terms of the diversity of your board to not only address these emerging issues, but these issues that we can't imagine right now, but 10 years, you've got a little bit of a flavor of what they could look like?
So maybe I could start on that, Rahul. I think number one is it is on every board agenda. And on the quarter ends, when we're doing our risk review, the cybersecurity and IT issues are firmly embedded in the risk culture and in the reporting back on exceptions. And I would say this to our participants. One thing we did learn in our simulations with a consulting firm who happened to be from Israel, is the distance between a near miss and a catastrophe is about this wide. It's not like the Pacific Ocean. And so you really have to pay attention to the near misses to be sure you've got it. And so quarterly we would review all that. I would say that the financial institutions in Canada in the aggregate are getting billions of whacks per month. There's no question in my mind about that. And you've got to stop them all or you could get into some difficulty. The second point I'd make is on the simulations themselves. I think we've run 3 or 4 simulations that I'm aware of. I'm looking at someone who's nodding, so I'm on safe ground. And I think we learn every time from those simulations. We get better and better and better prepared. So for example, in our bank, we've had a lot of experience with natural disasters. If you think of our footprint, I think we got to get the same level of expertise on cyber issues as we do on that.
One other comment, couldn't agree more with my remarks by my colleagues. When you always prepare, I think, there's no unique readiness, but when you do go through a transaction or you go through an event that is publicly known, you are becoming a target inevitably. And if you're a global company or you're globally active on the globe, which we all are, then there are certain parts of the world you have to accept it's not just a probability, it's a certainty. And every action you take either in that country or you'll be exposed to it. And so the uniqueness of moving and acting in an environment where you almost know with certainty that it's not just a risk, but it's an exposure that we have as a company, it makes it difficult because there's a necessity of caution that cannot be an inhibitor of being transactional, but on the other hand, you have to be smart about it. And I think that boards, when they look at anything from a transaction or an event, always do that, as Tom was saying, in the context of risk. And that risk is inevitably cybersecurity. So it's not just, today we talk about cybersecurity in the audit committee or whatever, but it's, so here's a transaction or here's an event. Let's just carve this out as a risk and look at that.
Yeah, maybe I'll go back to the origin of your question, last line of question, and think about what's required in a board in order to think about not just cybersecurity, but a pantheon of new risks. You think of the geopolitical contexts that our corporations face when they go out of country to do business, and we're all associated with companies that do that. And I just separate out, back to board culture, sort of, there's a structure to board, and long-standing boards have had a board matrix where you look at the competencies, the skills and experiences that you want to see in the directors that you have, and you look for some fit. But culture is really about the way the members, representing a diversity of experience and skills, come together to work on managing risks and also supporting management in realizing opportunities consistent with the prime business mandate of the enterprise. And I say, and Tom, you alluded to this in your opening comments, when the rubber hits the road, and there will always be tough moments for a board, having the capacity to sit with each other, trust each other, have comfort between the board and management, some sense that there is a real transparency, that when we meet for our board meetings, we're dealing with the right issues, not traditional issues, is all really key to having a successful capacity to govern for risk. And I'd say, notwithstanding all that, maybe a silver lining to the complexity that we work with is it really argues against complacency. And I don't imagine any of us, and in the audience who are on boards, where there's a sense of sitting back and relaxing, because there is a lot to engage with, both in supporting and giving oversight to management, but also in doing our duty as a board as well.
That's a great place, or a great segue into, we've sort of touched on elements of risk already. If we flip that for a moment, perhaps some ideas about what are your boards doing to enable innovation. Mm-hmm. So in some cases it's about competitive threats, others it's about just doing it better. Mm-hmm. But Tom, when you think about innovation at the board level, what do you think the board's could be doing, should be doing? What are you doing in terms of innovation?
Well, I can tell you what we are doing because one of the biggest events in my career at Scotiabank has been the opening of the digital factory, which was, I think, about a year ago here, and also in other countries. We just visited Lehman, saw their contribution to this cause, and this is the digitization of our bank to compete in today's world. And I think a lot of banks were stuck with legacy systems and they would be built up over time. They're just not good enough. And to be able to talk on mobile or in other forms of electronic communication, we just went all out. And so it's a growth industry. It's amazing who we're hiring and from which institutions they're coming from. Because I don't think 5 years ago you could have got people out of Google or Amazon or the people like that, data analysts, et cetera. So that's one part of our innovation concentration is digital technology.
Jochen.
Yeah, core subject. I be honest, we are paranoid about not catching up or being ahead of technology and innovation, whether it's disruptive or an opportunity. You know, we make a product that is desperately needed around the globe, but there is plenty of research that looks at alternatives, and we are quite realistic. Not that we anticipate that, so I'll qualify my comment here, but what if you wake up the next day and someone invented a product or a technology that displaces that specific product? And it could be, maybe in the future, it could be reality, but it's equally an opportunity for any company. If you're part of it, you can certainly take that opportunity and grow as a company. I'd say two things that as a board we do. One is to incorporate technology and innovation as strategy. So as management presents the strategy process or document, which is really the final evidence of how we plan ahead, innovation and technology has to be a part of that. It cannot be a sidebar, it cannot be a marginal topic, it has to be front and center. And then I think the second is that the board can and does become an enabler through education of directors, through enabling management, everything from ensuring that it's incorporated in annual budgets, that the organizational chart is structured so that innovation technology has its place. But I have to say, it must be front and center.
Yeah, just very, very quickly, I guess, with the three corporate boards I'm associated with, CPPIB, RBC, and CGI Group, I'd say innovation is happening in talent recruitment and management. It's happening certainly on the digital side, looking at other forms of disruption. Maybe just to focus on the governance side of it, one of the things, if you think back to the turn of the century into the new millennium, there was a lot of skepticism about doing board offsites. And they're often kind of looked at as boondoggles, and they varied in the extent to which they served a business purpose or not. I would say today, for any company board on which you sit that is doing global business, if the board isn't doing global offsites, we're not able to really have our finger on the pulse of both the risks and the opportunities, and frankly, how performance is being managed. And I'd say that's really re-emerging as a kind of innovation from the governance perspective. It's also, as we all know, if you're traveling together as a board, that's a real reinforcer of the chemistry of the board and our knowledge of each other. It's also a great opportunity to get to know your employees out of the country and to have interaction with the senior management team.
So we'd spoken earlier about board culture. Now we're going to touch on corporate culture. I'm going to pick up on one of the questions from the audience, which is, I'm just going to read it because it's so well written. When you consider some of the recent issues that have plagued some companies such as Sears Canada, Wells Fargo, Miramax, what responsibility does the board have? And you can see the elephant in the room there being Miramax and the recent Weinstein episode. That's corporate culture. Connect board culture with corporate culture, and what's the oversight responsibility here, in your opinion? Tom?
I think I said at the outset, culture is all important, and I think one famous person said, culture trumps strategy at one point. And so I think the culture of the board and the culture of the company have to be synchronized or harmonious. I can't see a long-standing relationship between a board and a management team that had completely different feelings about the culture of the organization. A couple of thoughts, though, on those events. One of the things that struck me that I hadn't seen elsewhere in my travels as a director, but happened at Scotia, was whenever there was such an issue, and I'm going back now to the whale, you know, and the SocGen and all that stuff, LIBOR fixing, whatever, there would be a time where the management would outline, A, what they think happened, or if they knew what happened, and secondly, what were the controls in place to prevent that or to mitigate that risk within the bank, which I thought was a huge learning exercise for any director because of the complexity of those businesses. And so on Wells Fargo, which is obviously right in our space, we've had at least three board sessions on that whole selling practices. And it started with Wells Fargo and well before the Canadian story broke with the TD. And so I think you got to take a proactive thing. This Weinstein? Is pretty fresh, and I'm pretty sure that'll be on our HR agenda at our meeting at the end of this month, because that's serious stuff. And I think it's just starting now. I think that's opened up a whole freedom of people feeling secure in speaking out, which is different.
Yeah, it's a growing subject because corporate culture is what in my opinion defines the success of a company. Company with a great, good culture, however you define it, will be very successful, and we've seen the detriments in the examples that you brought up. I think the challenge from a board's perspective is culture is an abstract term. It's a sum of values that is displayed by a group of people. But how do you put metrics on that, and then as a board go beyond looking at the abstract term, but measure it? And I think there's been great progress where people carve it up and say, well, there are metrics within management, and that looks as management too collegial, is at a highly performance-driven company that does not have the regard for the impact of any action taken. Those are all things that are highlighted that the boards can watch for and measure, and they could be signals. I'm stealing a quote from a paper that was published on board culture, which I liked a lot, is if the board doesn't watch, management starts breathing its own exhaust, which means... I think I get the point, and I think I know it's a drastic analogy, but it just says how important it is to observe that and put those metrics in place that the directors can watch for.
To your question, board has responsibility for corporate culture. I would say there's no denying that, and that really brings an obligation not just to the board as a whole, but to each director to make sure they understand what's happening, to ask questions and to probe, look at the consent agendas, and be proactive in raising these themes. As Tom says, this is a theme that'll the culture of how employees are treated is core to the integrity of a company, and you don't want, however, these big issues that come up, whether it's Wells Fargo or sexual harassment or whatever it is, to be a new issue at the board. These are themes that ought to be there and well socialized, and it really speaks as well to the role of committees on a board to do some of the deep dives that create knowledgeable directors to deal proactively on some of them.
So you're anticipating one of the questions here a little bit, and it just carries on that strain a little bit. Why is it a bigger issue now than it was 10 years ago?
I don't think it is.
No.
I think there's attention to it, which is fantastic, but I don't think it's a bigger issue now.
I think the transparency today is totally different, right?
Right.
And so it's been, it's become, you can't get away with it, whatever it was. I agree with you. It's not new, this behavior.
Good. Okay. So we've touched on everything from risk, cyber risk, technology, innovation, board culture, corporate culture. That's a lot for any individual to have to engage with, much less a board with this tremendous type of responsibilities for corporate assets and shareholder responsibilities. How does a director on an individual level stay up to date on these things? How do you go about staying current on these issues as they're changing so fast in this complex environment?
Well, first of all, a board is like an orchestra, and from time to time, a board member is the lead violinist on a topic. So I think good board composition gives you a depth of knowledge in areas that are critical to the business. So what I'm also arguing is you don't have to have deep expertise in every topic to be a competent director. The second is the management team itself. If it's an issue of importance, then it should be an issue of importance to the company, and the company has a lot more resources and talent than the board would have, just in sheer numbers. And so a lot of it is training of the board by people either in the business who are experts in it, and or getting outsiders to come and confirm what their understanding is from the outside looking in. And so, for example, these simulations with cybersecurity is an example of how we get some comfort at the board level. You can do the same thing in other topics. So I think the point I'd leave is simply a board member, to be competent, doesn't have to have deep expertise in every topic that comes to the board.
Yeah, I mean, first, I have a tremendous admiration for the devotion of directors, just given the magnitude of material and the spectrum. You know, I'm a CEO, I'm a director, and I'm transitioning into an executive chair role. And I mean, the magnitude of information that's out there that management puts forward is just unbelievable. I mean, board books often have 1,000+ pages, and in management, we spend a lot of time thinking how do we present and how we're selective. But I think overall, it is really important that there's going back to culture again. Culture in the company where that information is shared, it's selectively shared in a way that the director can be educated. Side tours are really important. Access to management, I think, is hugely important. The ability of a director to interact, and you know, if there's a CEO who's somewhat defensive about that, this day and age, it's poor governance. But it also doesn't work. A director has to have the ability to really have access to management to stay up to date. And I think that process is so important, because otherwise, you know, the amount of information that needs to be consumed it cannot be digested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, clearly board education is a requirement now. It's got to be.
So things like the director's education program at the
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So both within the board and through special opportunities.
What a long.
So I heard it said recently that it's the job of the board to both appoint and disappoint the CEO. Huh. How do you deal with directors that aren't quite cutting it or aren't as effective as they should be? I mean, this is a challenge. It's one thing to get good directors on a board, but not everyone is going to make the bar. Tom, have you ever had to face that?
Yes.
And how did you?
Well, I go back to Bell. It's a fact. It's not a myth. The Bell deal collapsed. We had 16 directors, and when we emerged from the ashes, we had 5 and built back from there. And I think if you've got an issue, I call it the SPCA chat. Every dog gets one bite. And if it doesn't change, you have to change the director. That's simple.
If I could just speak very directly to this, look, ongoing board evaluation is critically important, and you know, boards today must have a process where there's peer feedback, there is chair to director feedback, there is input to the chairs of committees, to the directors on committee function, on board function, and I like your formula. I hadn't quite thought about it that way, but there is a moment where you have to say, you know, we can help you. Are you open to learning? And that often works, you know, in this context of new considerations, because there are some new considerations. Cybersecurity would be one. Some of the geopolitical risks that our corporations face. These are new, and no one's going to be an expert in everything. But everybody's actually got to have an ability to engage intelligently on all of these risk parameters. And so giving support to development is really important. But if people don't do their duty, then they shouldn't be on the board.
And you can't use term limits or age limits as your rationale.
Can't avoid it.
No.
Yeah, I take, Tom, your analogy of an orchestra, and I think mistakes can and will be made. It's inevitable because you can follow the skill set, but you don't know what the chemistry will look like because there's not enough time in interaction. You'll know it after a couple of board meetings. But to steal your analogy, when you hear a bad violin, you need to fix it. Don't let it go on for too long. I think that would be my point. That when it does become evident, there's not good chemistry, not a good fit, then repair it.
So this question that I've got from the audience is a very future-oriented one, which I think is apropos to sort of wrap things up a bit. And that is, how are innovative boards introducing diversity of talent into their culture? And this one is particularly the youth perspective. So this is a generational question. Any thoughts on that, Jochen?
Yeah, so just for clarification, is that the diversity of bringing youth in, or is it from a youth perspective on general diversity?
I'm thinking it's the former, bringing youth in.
Youth in, yeah. I think really, absolutely important. I think when we look at diversity and the board looks at diversity, we have to be careful not to just look at gender diversity, minority inclusion, but broaden it and think, what does that involve? How does a company become diverse? And I think that we've all found out that as we look at targets that we have, whether that is on gender diversity or minority inclusion, you can't start today and get to your goal within a couple of years. It has to start at the grassroots. It has to be with education. It has to be with hiring. It has to be with progression in the company. It has to have a fair process evaluation, and that's where youth comes in. We look at that, at least I look at it, and I know my board looks at it the same way, is that when we start at that part, everything from scholarship, bringing young people in, ensuring that they're part of our diversity. We have a growing leaders program, like most companies have programs that elevate, that bring young people in to participate in more senior management meetings and allow them to grow and become a very diverse part of our culture and our company.
Heather?
I'd like to, I will address the youth part, but I'd like to first say something about gender diversity. This is brand new. So it may be that there's a comfort that people are talking a lot about it, but I would say, as I look at the world, the 30% Club is new. I'm very proud that CPPIB was a leader in advocating for it and that RBC came in early on it. But the notion that we would have 30% females on our boards and 30% represented in the C-suite, we got a long way to go to get that, not on actually either of the boards, 50% women at CPPIB and over 30% on the RBC board. But if you look at public institutions where there was an emphasis on gender back in the 90s, women got appointed as presidents of organizations, and if I think of the university system, as deans, VPs, and presidents. And a decade later, there are fewer today than there were now 2 decades later, but every decade actually declined because doing it once is not enough. This is culture. This is at the heart of culture, and it's making it comfortable. And I believe other forms of diversity are going to be very hard to accommodate on a board if you don't get gender right. So I thank you for letting me say that. On youth, as a baby boomer, I would say baby boom generation, we are hogging the slots. We have so much to learn. If you think about these issues of technology and disruption and security and privacy, if we don't have next generations coming onto our boards, and there are various ways of doing that, but also our companies really making room for people to move up, we will be missing out on both a business advantage and also understanding risks as they exist today. So I'm strongly in support of renewal, and I really think we have to stay the course on gender.
Tom, I think you get the last word on this.
Well, I believe in diversity of thought, and obviously gender is part of that, ethnic is part of it, and so forth. At the bank, we're blessed because over 50% of our employees are actually native Spanish speakers, and we have a huge amount of talent and young people in the Pacific Rim in particular. I was impressed by how old I felt when I was in Lima because everyone was a lot younger. On the gender diversity side, I'll pick on Loblaw, for example. If you take management appointments or owner appointments off the board, we're at 50-50. And it's a business-driven initiative. It just makes common sense. And if you look at our customers, and particularly in Shoppers Drug Mart, and if you look at our staff, it seems obvious you should be there. Maybe even should be the majority. So I am very firm that it's a smart business initiative to have the gender diversity. Well, we're members of Catalyst. It's not what drives my thinking. I think it's harder at the CEO suite level than it is for directors. I think if you look, there are capable people to fill a diversity slot at the director level in Canada, and that inventory is growing. I think it's harder in the C-suite only because the people who are up and coming may face life challenges in the sense of being mothers and being away from work for a while. And then they come back and away they go. But there's an interruption largely for the female population. So I think it's harder inside the company than it is at the director level because you're shopping in an age group that's quite different for directors.
But building the pipeline.
But building the pipeline.
Part of.
So you use examples. There are two great CEO NEOs that I worked with, Marianne Turcotte-Bell and Sarah Davis, who's now the president at Loblaw. And what's interesting, when they became NEOs and they were in the proxy, suddenly they were in demand as a director. They were just as good the year before, right?
I think also companies fundamentally believe today, I certainly do with all my heart, that a diverse company is a better company. And that's how I communicate, and I expect, and my board does communicate as well, that a diverse company is a better company, and everything starts from there. Every year, we have parents bring their kids to school, parents bring their kids to work. And it's ninth graders that come, and we actually collect them because we've got a large base, so we have 70, 80 kids. And I speak to them for about half an hour, and it's mostly a very casual Q&A. And this year, for the first time, so these are ninth graders, they're 14, 15 years old, the discussion of diversity and minority inclusion took probably about 15 minutes of that 30 minutes. And I was deeply, deeply impressed. When young girls at the age of 14 asked the question and said, how, Mr. CEO, can you ensure that when I will work for this company, that we are a diverse company? And I think that's all part of it. To the youth question is that as we bring, and I very much look forward to hiring them or the company hiring them, then I think culturally we'll grow so much and get to that objective.
What a great place to end this conversation. I told you we could go on all afternoon, but we ended up on diversity, about performance, not conformance. And what a great way to look about the future of corporate governance. So thank you all for your very considered opinions.
Distinguished panelists, on behalf of everyone here today in the Canadian Club of Toronto, thank you so much for talking about the future of corporate governance. A very central theme that I certainly took away was the importance of culture, both at the board level and at the corporation level, and the role the board plays in helping to steward and manage that culture is far more important now than it has been, or far greater transparency and understanding how to drive it in different ways in a dynamic and ever-changing world. Your insights, your wisdom, and your experience certainly were brought to bear this afternoon, and we really, really appreciate that you took your time out to discuss with us today. We wish all of you continued success in everything that you do, and once again, thank you so much. I would like to just thank Rahul. He did an outstanding job at being our moderator today. He clearly has a nice program for any of those that are interested at the ICD. And we're always grateful for your presence and your support of the Canadian Club. So thank you to Rahul as well. Before we conclude, I just highlight a few other events that are upcoming. On Thursday, November 9th, we have Harley Finkelstein, the Chief Operating Officer of Shopify. He'll talk to us about the future of retail. And on Friday, November 17th, we will welcome the Honorable Reza Moridi, Ontario's Minister of Research, Innovation and Science, for a luncheon. To order tickets or to learn more about the club, please visit our website at canadianclub.org. I would like to extend another thank you to BLG for their support of today's event. And we would like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for streaming today's event. Thank you all for being with us today. We look forward to having you again soon. Have a wonderful afternoon. Merci et à la prochaine.